It was early December in the year 1941. The world was already deep in war. Across Europe, cities lay in ruins. In the Pacific, a new storm was forming. The British Empire, stretched thin across continents, faced a rising power from the east, Japan. In those days, Britain still believed that its mighty battleships ruled the seas. Among those ships stood one of the most modern and powerful vessels ever built, HMS Prince of Wales, a battleship of the King George V class. She was large, strong, and armed with heavy guns that could strike an enemy miles away. To the Royal Navy, she was not just a warship. She was a symbol, a proof that Britain still held command of the oceans. The Prince of Wales had already seen battle. Earlier in May 1941, she had fought the German battleship Bismarck in the cold North Atlantic. That fight was fierce, but the Prince of Wales survived. Now, months later, she was sent far from home across the world to the warm waters of Southeast Asia. Her mission was clear. Japan had begun moving into Malaya and Thailand, threatening British colonies and trade routes. Britain wanted to show power, to remind Japan that the Royal Navy could not be challenged. So the Admiralty sent Force Z, a small but proud group led by Admiral Sir Tom Phillips. The group included the battleship Prince of Wales, the battlecruiser HMS Repulse, and 4 destroyers. On December 2, 1941, the ships reached Singapore, the great naval base that Britain called the Gibraltar of the East. There, the crews prepared for what would soon be one of the most tragic missions in naval history. For the men aboard, life in Singapore felt both peaceful and uneasy. The tropical air was heavy, and the city buzzed with soldiers, sailors, and locals who had seen the war coming closer each week. Newspapers spoke of Japanese armies gathering in French Indochina, yet many officers believed that Japan would not dare attack British forces directly. They thought the Royal Navy was too strong, too respected. But not everyone agreed. Some British and American commanders warned that Japan's air power had grown fast. They had seen what Japanese bombers could do in China. The British Admiralty in London had also received reports suggesting Japan was planning to strike soon. Still, orders were given. Prince of Wales and Repulse would move north to challenge any Japanese invasion attempt. The mood aboard the Prince of Wales was mixed. She was a new ship, still showing signs of earlier mechanical troubles, especially in her engine and propeller systems. But she looked impressive. Her gray hull shone in the sun, her massive 14-inch guns pointed proudly toward the sea. To the men who served on her, she was the heart of British pride in Asia. On December 8, 1941, while the crews were still preparing in Singapore, news arrived that shocked everyone. Japan had attacked the American naval base at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii. In just a few hours, Japan had sunk or damaged much of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. The news raced through the docks like fire. Some sailors were silent, others cursed under their breath. The war in the Pacific had begun. Now Admiral Phillips faced a decision. With Pearl Harbor burning and Japanese forces landing in northern Malaya, should he wait for air support? Or should he strike quickly, hoping to catch the Japanese transports before they could unload troops? Phillips was a brave and respected man, but also cautious by nature. Yet he felt the need to act. Britain had to show strength, especially now that the Americans had been hit. He believed that surprise and speed might save the situation. So he decided to sail, even without air cover. At 5:35 p.m. on December 8, 1941, Prince of Wales and Repulse, along with their destroyer escorts, left Singapore Harbor. The tropical evening was calm. The men stood at their posts as the ships moved past the coastline and out into the open sea. The sound of engines filled the air, deep and steady. No one on board could know that within 2 days, both great ships would lie on the ocean floor. The journey north was quiet at first. The sea was smooth and the sky was clear. The ships moved along the east coast of Malaya, searching for reports of Japanese landings near Kota Baru and Singora. But the fleet's biggest weakness was clear. They had no aircraft of their own to scout ahead or defend against air attack. The Royal Air Force units in Malaya were small and far away. If Japanese bombers appeared, there would be little defense except anti-aircraft guns. On December 9th, Japanese reconnaissance planes began shadowing the British ships. Their crews photographed the formation from high above. Admiral Phillips did not realize how closely they were being watched. He changed course several times, trying to confuse the enemy, but the Japanese had already reported his position. That night, Phillips received news that no Japanese invasion fleet was found near the coast. It was late, around 8 p.m., when he decided to turn back south toward Singapore. The mission seemed to have failed. The ships slowed in the darkness, their lights dimmed, the sea calm once again. Many of the men thought the danger had passed. Some went below deck to rest. Others stayed on the open deck, smoking quietly under the faint glow of the stars. But far away, hundreds of miles to the north in Saigon, Japanese air commanders were preparing for a strike. They had tracked the British ships for almost 2 days. In the early morning hours of December 10, 1941, dozens of Japanese bombers and torpedo planes warmed up their engines. Their orders were clear: find and destroy the Prince of Wales and Repulse. As the sun rose that day, the calm sea south of Kuantan off the coast of Malaya was about to become the stage of a disaster that would change naval warfare forever. The morning of December 10, 1941 began quietly. The sea off the coast of Kuantan on the eastern side of Malaya was calm and bright. The sun rose over the water, and the men aboard HMS Prince of Wales and HMS Repulse felt a small sense of relief. They had not seen any sign of Japanese ships during the night. The air was warm, and the sound of the waves was peaceful. Admiral Sir Tom Phillips stood on the bridge of the Prince of Wales. He was dressed neatly, as always, and calm in his manner. The sailors respected him. He had served the Royal Navy for more than 40 years. But on that morning he was fighting something inside, a quiet worry. He knew his ships were alone, far from friendly airfields with no air cover. Still, he hoped that the sea and sky would remain empty. Around 10 a.m., the lookouts spotted something. A small plane, high and shining in the sunlight, was circling far above. It was not British, it was Japanese. The men knew at once what that meant. The enemy had found them. The peaceful sea suddenly felt heavy and still. That plane sent a message back to Saigon, where the Japanese 22nd Air Flotilla was already waiting. Within minutes, dozens of bombers and torpedo planes began to take off. Their engines roared across the runways. In total, about 86 aircraft were sent to attack the British force. These planes were fast, well-trained, and carried deadly torpedoes that could rip open even the thickest armor. On the Prince of Wales, the crew began to prepare for battle. Anti-aircraft guns were manned. The men loaded shells and checked their sights. Below deck, others sealed watertight doors and waited for orders. The ship's engines kept a steady rhythm as she turned slowly, her gray hull cutting through the waves. At 11 a.m., the first Japanese bombers arrived. They came in from the north, flying low and fast. The sky that had been blue only moments before now roared with the sound of engines. The men could see the silver wings glinting in the sun. The first bombs fell toward Repulse. Water exploded high into the air. The British guns opened fire, filling the sky with black smoke. For a few moments, the British sailors believed they were holding their ground. The Repulse managed to dodge several bombs. She was older but fast and handled well. The Prince of Wales, heavier and slower, moved alongside, her large guns turning toward the sea but helpless against aircraft. Her smaller guns barked at the sky, chasing the planes as they circled for another run. At 11:13 a.m., one bomb struck the Repulse. It exploded near her hangar, tearing through the deck and starting fires. But she stayed afloat. The men cheered for a second, and then they heard the sound that changed everything. From the northeast came another group of planes, torpedo bombers flying low over the water. There were about 26 of them, and they came in waves. They spread out wide, like hawks circling their prey. The British ships turned sharply to avoid them. The sea became a battlefield of white foam and black smoke. The Repulse was quick. She dodged several torpedoes, turning tightly left and right. But the Prince of Wales could not move the same way. She was larger, her engines already having problems from past mechanical faults. Then came the hit that sealed her fate. At 11:44 a.m., a torpedo struck the Prince of Wales on her port side, near the propeller shaft. The explosion shook the ship from bow to stern. Deep inside, the blast twisted the shaft and tore open the hull. Seawater rushed in at terrifying speed. The power in the rear engines failed. The ship began to slow. The damage was worse than anyone realized. The flooding spread quickly through the lower decks. Lights went out, communication lines were broken. Men ran through dark, narrow corridors trying to close bulkheads and stop the water. But the sea was stronger. Within minutes, parts of the engine room were completely underwater. On the bridge, Admiral Phillips understood that his flagship was in danger. He ordered Repulse to move closer and give support. The destroyers HMS Electra, HMS Express, HMS Vampire, and HMS Tenedos also turned back, ready to defend. But the Japanese were not finished. Another wave of planes came from the west, this time attacking both ships at once. Bombs splashed into the water all around them. The noise was deafening. Smoke covered the decks. The gunners kept firing, but it was like trying to stop a storm with a handful of stones. At 12:20 p.m., several torpedoes struck Repulse in quick succession. One tore through her side, another near the stern. The old ship slowed, listed to port, and began to roll. Captain Tennant gave the order to abandon ship. Men jumped into the sea, grabbing ropes, life rafts, and floating debris. Within minutes, the Repulse began to sink stern first. She went down quickly, taking about 513 men with her. The men aboard the Prince of Wales watched in silence as their sister ship disappeared beneath the waves. There was no time to mourn. More planes were coming. The Japanese pilots, well-trained and precise, now focused on the last target. At 12:45 p.m., another torpedo struck the Prince of Wales on her starboard side. Then another, then a third. Each explosion threw men off their feet. The battleship began to list heavily to port. Inside, the corridors filled with smoke and seawater. The main guns were useless now. Electrical systems failed one by one. On the open deck, sailors struggled to free the wounded and launch lifeboats. The destroyers nearby laid smoke screens and fired their guns upward, trying desperately to protect the dying ship. But the Japanese kept coming, circling, striking again and again. By 1 p.m., the Prince of Wales was nearly dead in the water. Her bow was low, her stern rising slightly. Men clung to railings and ropes as the deck tilted more and more. Admiral Phillips and his staff refused to leave the bridge. They stood calmly as the ship groaned and began to roll. At 1:20 p.m., the great battleship turned on her side and began to sink. The water swallowed her slowly, taking her flag, her guns, and her pride beneath the waves. The sound faded, leaving only the cries of men and the hiss of burning oil on the water. The destroyers rushed in to rescue survivors. The HMS Express and HMS Electra pulled hundreds of men from the sea, many covered in oil, many clinging to bits of wreckage. In total, about 327 men from the Prince of Wales, including Admiral Phillips and Captain Leach, were lost. The sea off Kuantan became their grave. When the last plane left, silence returned. The calm sea of that morning was now a graveyard of twisted metal and floating debris. Two of Britain's proudest warships were gone, sunk not by enemy battleships, but by aircraft. The men who survived looked back at the smoke on the horizon. They had just seen the end of something far greater than two ships. They had seen the end of an era, the day when battleships lost their crown to the power of the sky. When the Prince of Wales and Repulse slipped beneath the sea on December 10, 1941, the sound of their death did not end in the waters off Kuantan. It echoed around the world. The message first reached Singapore through a short, broken radio signal. One of the destroyers, the HMS Express, managed to send a few words before silence took over. Both ships lost. Those 3 words hit like a thunderbolt. Inside the naval base, men stood still. Officers repeated the message, not believing what they had heard. Britain's newest battleship, the pride of the Royal Navy, and one of its oldest war veterans, were both gone in one morning. By nightfall, the news reached London. It was December 10, 1941, still early in the day in Britain, when the Admiralty received the report. Prime Minister Winston Churchill was in his office when he was told. He later said it was one of the darkest moments of his life. He had trusted those ships to stand as a symbol of strength in the East. Now they were gone. Churchill sat in silence for a long time. Then he said quietly, "In all the war, I never received a more direct shock." He knew what it meant. The British Navy had ruled the seas for centuries. Now, in just a few hours, 2 of its finest ships had been destroyed, not by other ships, but by aircraft. The meaning was clear. The world had changed. The next morning, British newspapers printed the headlines. Prince of Wales and Repulse sunk off Malaya. Across the empire, people read the news with disbelief. Families of sailors waited for names to appear in lists of survivors. Many never saw those names. In America, where the attack on Pearl Harbor had just happened 3 days earlier, the news of the British losses deepened the shock. Two great naval powers, both known for their mighty battleships, had now learned the same lesson. The sky had become deadlier than the sea. For the Japanese, it was a moment of victory and proof of their new strategy. Their air commanders sent back reports filled with pride. The 22nd Air Flotilla, based in Saigon, had done what no one had done before. They had sunk 2 heavy warships in open sea, without the help of any of their own ships. Japanese radio broadcasts announced the triumph to their nation. The British fleet destroyed in the South China Sea, they said. In Tokyo, government leaders celebrated, but the Japanese admirals understood the true weight of what they had achieved. They had not just won a battle, they had changed the shape of modern war. In Singapore, the mood turned dark. The city that had once been called the Fortress of the East now felt unprotected. Without Prince of Wales and Repulse, the seas around Malaya were open to Japanese invasion. The men stationed there looked at the empty harbor where the ships had once stood. Only the destroyers remained, scarred and silent. Messages poured in from across the empire, from Australia, India, Ceylon, and Hong Kong, all asking the same question. If those ships could not survive, what could? For the British Admiralty, the loss was more than military. It was personal. The Prince of Wales was the newest battleship in the fleet, launched only the previous year in 1940. She had fought the Bismarck, escorted convoys, and carried Churchill himself across the Atlantic for meetings with President Roosevelt. Her destruction so soon after being built felt like a wound to national pride. In Parliament, members demanded answers. How could 2 major ships sail without air cover? Why were there no fighter planes ready to defend them? The answers were painful. The Royal Air Force in Malaya had too few aircraft, and those they had were older models, Brewster Buffaloes and Hudson bombers, no match for the Japanese planes. But the real truth ran deeper. It was a belief that battleships were still the kings of war. For generations, the world had measured naval power by the number and size of these giants. Even after airplanes had shown their strength in earlier battles, many naval leaders still believed that thick armor and heavy guns would protect their ships. The sinking of Prince of Wales and Repulse ended that belief forever. Back in Britain, the Admiralty gathered survivors' reports from HMS Electra, HMS Express, and the others. The men who returned told their stories simply. They spoke of the calm sea, the sudden roar of engines, the flashes of torpedoes in the water. They spoke of bravery, of sailors who stayed at their guns until the very end, and officers who refused to leave their stations. Those stories reached newspapers and radio stations across the world. In homes, people sat by the radio as announcers described the final fight. The old voice of the BBC read out the list of the lost. It was said in a steady, calm tone, but many listening could hear the sadness beneath the words. Churchill ordered a message to be sent to the families of the fallen. They fought with great courage, it said. Their sacrifice will not be forgotten. In the days that followed, Japan continued its advance through Malaya. Without the British ships, there was little to stop them from landing troops along the coast. Within 2 months, they reached Singapore itself. The fall of that city in February 1942 would become another deep wound to British pride. But long before Singapore fell, the loss of Prince of Wales and Repulse had already changed the course of history. It proved to every nation that air power now ruled the sea. Battleships, no matter how strong or modern, could no longer survive without air protection. Navies around the world took notice. The United States, reeling from its own losses at Pearl Harbor, began to build aircraft carriers at record speed. The British Royal Navy started to rethink its entire strategy. Every admiral, every naval planner now understood the same truth. The age of the battleship had ended, and a new age had begun. Even years later, long after the war was over, sailors who had survived that day would remember the sight of their great ships sinking beneath the waves. Some said that the sea off Kuantan never felt the same again. It was calm, yes, but beneath that calm lay the ghosts of Prince of Wales and Repulse, two proud giants who had gone down fighting, and whose loss had changed the future of naval war forever. The loss of the Prince of Wales and Repulse on December 10, 1941, was not just another defeat. It was the turning point that forced every navy in the world to face a new truth. The battleship, once the symbol of power and pride, could no longer rule the sea alone. In the weeks that followed, British and American naval officers studied every report they could find about the disaster. The British Admiralty's action report described how the Japanese planes had attacked in perfect coordination, bombers from high above and torpedo planes sweeping low across the waves. The British ships had fought bravely, but their guns could not shoot fast enough to stop so many planes coming from every direction. For generations, admirals had believed that armor and big guns were the answer to every threat. The Prince of Wales had some of the thickest armor ever built. Her deck was designed to withstand shells from other ships, not torpedoes from airplanes. The Japanese attack proved that even the strongest steel could not protect against the sky. In London, meetings were held inside the Admiralty War Room. Maps of the South China Sea were spread across tables. Officers marked the exact times and directions of every attack. They looked for mistakes, for something that could have been done differently. But in truth, there was little anyone could have done. Without fighter protection, the ships were exposed from the moment they left Singapore Harbor. The Royal Air Force had too few planes to help. The nearest airfield was far inland, and communication between air and sea units was poor. By the time the distress signals were sent from the Prince of Wales, the attack was already nearly over. The closest fighters only reached the area long after both ships had sunk. From that moment, British planners began to change their way of thinking. They realized that the future of naval war was in the air, not only for attack, but for defense. The aircraft carrier, once seen as just a support ship, was now the true weapon of control. A carrier could strike from hundreds of miles away, and its aircraft could protect a fleet in ways guns never could. The United States Navy reached the same conclusion after Pearl Harbor. Within days, shipyards across America began working day and night to build new aircraft carriers. The same change happened in Britain. Plans for new battleships were quietly reduced, while carrier projects were expanded. Every ship that could carry planes, even in small numbers, became more valuable than any heavy gun. This change was not easy for older admirals to accept. Many of them had grown up in the age of the great battleships, ships like the Hood, the Nelson, and the Rodney. These men had spent their lives believing that naval power meant thick armor and heavy shells. But the sea had taught a hard lesson. The Prince of Wales had cost millions to build and carried the best equipment Britain could design. Yet she had been sunk by aircraft launched hundreds of miles away. The same had happened to the American fleet at Pearl Harbor. These two events together showed that no fleet, no matter how strong, could survive without control of the sky. In the months that followed, new ideas spread quickly. Fleets began to travel with full air support. Aircraft carriers became the heart of every major task force. Smaller ships were fitted with more anti-aircraft guns. New radar systems were added to warn of incoming planes. The lessons from the South China Sea were being written into every new naval plan. Even within the Japanese Navy, the attack on Prince of Wales and Repulse confirmed what some of their own officers had long believed, that the aircraft carrier was the key to victory. Only 6 months later, at the Battle of Midway in June 1942, the same type of Japanese aircraft carriers that had struck Pearl Harbor would face the United States in a battle decided entirely by planes. The outcome of that fight would again prove how far the world had moved from the old ways of war. For Britain, the loss was painful, but it forced progress. The Royal Navy soon began converting older ships into light carriers and adding escort carriers to protect convoys. The airmen who once served under the Royal Air Force were trained to fly from the decks of ships. The future was taking shape, a future where planes and pilots would become as vital to the Navy as sailors and gunners. By 1943, the change was complete. The old belief in the battleship's invincibility was gone. Aircraft carriers led every major fleet, and air support was part of every mission plan. When British ships returned to the Pacific later in the war, They sailed under skies guarded by their own fighters, a lesson learned the hard way from the loss of the Prince of Wales and Repulse. Historians would later say that December 10th, 1941, was the day the battleship died. That may sound poetic, but it is true in a simple sense. From that day on, the ocean belonged to those who could command the air above it. The British officers who survived the disaster never forgot that. Many of them continued to serve through the war, training younger sailors and airmen. Some later said that the bravery they saw that day and the lessons learned from it saved many lives in future battles. The Prince of Wales and Repulse did not die in vain. Their loss opened the eyes of the world. They showed that courage alone was not enough, that modern war demanded new thinking, new tools, and new strategies. And so, out of the smoke and wreckage of that December morning, a new age of naval power was born, not ruled by guns or armor, but by the wings of aircraft soaring over the endless sea. The story of the Prince of Wales and Repulse is more than a tale of war. It is a story about change, courage, and the passing of an age. On that morning of December 10th, 1941, when the sea off Kuantan swallowed two of the greatest ships ever built, something far greater sank with them, an old belief that strength alone could protect a nation. The men who served on those ships were not thinking about history or technology. They were sailors doing their duty, far from home, in a part of the world few of them had ever seen before. They trusted the steel beneath their feet, the officers who led them, and the empire they served. When the sky darkened with Japanese aircraft, they did not run. They stayed at their stations, loading guns, fighting fires, and helping each other until the very last moment. Many of them were barely 20 years old. Some had joined the Navy straight out of school, dreaming of adventure and service. Their courage was simple, human, and real. It was the kind of bravery that does not come from medals or orders, but from loyalty to their shipmates, to their flag, and to the promise that they would stand their ground no matter what came from the sky above. When we speak of the Prince of Wales and Repulse today, we do not remember them for the fact that they were sunk. We remember them for what they revealed. Their loss forced the world to open its eyes and move forward. It showed that no empire, no matter how mighty, could hold back time. From their sacrifice came progress, not only in how wars were fought, but in how nations learned to prepare, to think, and to adapt. The aircraft carriers that later ruled the oceans, the coordination between sea and air that defines modern naval power, all of it was born in some way from the lessons written that day in fire and smoke. But perhaps the most important lesson was not about ships or planes at all. It was about humility, about how even the greatest strength must bend to change, and how courage still matters when all else fails. The sea off Kuantan is calm now. Fishermen pass over the spot without knowing the history below. The waves move gently, as if guarding something sacred beneath. Deep down, the Prince of Wales still stands upright, her guns silent but her spirit unbroken. Nearby, the Repulse lies resting, her hull softened by time, but her name still carried with pride. They remain there, side by side, two giants of another world, resting in peace. Above them, new ships pass, powered by technologies those sailors could never have imagined. Yet every modern vessel, every aircraft that rises from a carrier deck, carries in its story a trace of that December day. History often remembers victories, but it is the moments of loss that teach the most. The Prince of Wales and Repulse taught the world that bravery has many faces, not only in winning battles, but in facing the impossible with steady hands and loyal hearts. As the years pass and the world changes again, their story reminds us that progress always comes at a price. The sea took them, but it also gave back their memory, a lasting reminder that even in the darkest hours, courage can shine bright enough to light the path ahead. And so, the tale of the Prince of Wales and Repulse does not end with their sinking. It continues, in the lessons they left behind, in the ships that sail today, and in the quiet gratitude of those who remember. May they rest forever beneath the calm waters they once ruled. May their names be spoken with respect for generations to come. And may the sea that claimed them guard their memory for all time. Two ships, one story, and a legacy that changed the world.